We'll give it just a minute for folks to keep joining joining the webinar. I see those numbers ticking up, but we're so excited you're here with us today. And wherever you are, I hope it's a little bit cooler and less humid than it is here in Central North Carolina. But thank you so much for joining us. All right, I will go ahead and jump in and get us started. We are recording this session so everyone knows, and we'll have it posted later so you can access it or share it with your colleagues as well. I am Sarah Lawrence. I lead our Building Better Regions community of practice, and I'm joined here by my colleague Pearl Sullivan, who is our coordinator of the community of practice. And we're so pleased to be here with you today. Really, we're so excited about creating this space for storytelling and the storytelling showcase to share out how some of the Building Better Regions coalitions have adopted storytelling approaches in their economic development work and how that has made a difference for them. We really want to take this moment, though, before we dive in, to thank our incredible partners and supporters of the community of practice, EDA. They've created these opportunities for us to both provide this kind of technical assistance, but also to share out what we're learning to the wider field. In these kinds of emerging practices or approaches that are really making a difference for the Building Better Regions coalitions. So thank you to EDA. For a very brief background on how we got here, after we launched the Building Better Regions community of practice about 2 years ago, we reached out to all 60 of the Build Back Better Regional Challenge grantees. So these are 60 regions across the country, and we asked them about what are your pressing needs and how can the community of practice help support you or help you meet those needs. And one of these common areas or one of these common issues was around storytelling. And what we heard at a very high level, and I'm summarizing again from about a year and a half ago, were people sharing that they felt like their regions were perceived in a certain way, but their region was really, there was much more happening or different things happening. And they either wanted to, and they really wanted to learn about how to tap into the power of storytelling to convey either both, whether it was audiences in their region or whether it was to people around the world about what their region was really like and what the economic development opportunities and transformation that was underway there. And so with that, our community practice was very fortunate to partner with Dr. John Trybus, who's here today. John is a renowned story scientist and the director of Georgetown University's Center for Social Impact Communication. John was again, we were over the moon to work with him, and he led 2 storytelling learning cohorts this past winter and spring. And today we're here to share out with you and relay what different coalitions got from this learning exchange and how storytelling has helped reshape or advance their work in economic development. So joining us, we are very excited to also have our participants from the Building Better Regions community of practice. We have 3 regions that are being represented today. So from Detroit's Global Epicenter of Mobility, we have Janine Gant, who is the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice Officer for the Global Epicenter of Mobility. And from Buffalo's Western New York Advanced Manufacturing, we have Tom Ulbrich, the president and CEO of Goodwill of Western New York, and also Kelly Zaki, who is the data manager at Goodwill of Western New York. And last but not least, from El Paso's West Texas Aerospace and Defense Coalition, we have Louis Castillo, who is the industry project manager at Workforce Solutions Borderplex. I'm going to turn it over to John to share and lead the rest of this session, but I want to remind everyone, I think, our goal is to share out and also to hear from you. So we would love to get your questions. The best way to share those questions with us is to use the Q&A box there at the bottom of your screen that has a little question mark in there. So if you could put your questions in there, we'll be monitoring those and we will have time. We'll answer them as we can in the chat or in the Q&A function, I'm sorry. And then also we'll have time at the end of the session where we'll surface some of these questions and respond to you. But with that, John, I'll turn it over to you. And thank you so much for all you've done for our community of practice.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And hello, everybody. So glad that you can join us today. And Sarah, I have to echo you as well, the invitation to be leading these cohorts. I was over the moon as well. That's the technical term. And worked with such phenomenal leaders. You're going to meet 3 of them today. I hope more of them are on the webinar as well. But I wanted to start with giving you a little bit of an overview of the curriculum. What did we cover? So as Sarah mentioned, we really convened 2 cohorts from across the country. And these were lessons that were spread across 10 weeks. And they resulted in a lot of different things. The capstones and really the encapsulation of the story work that each of these respective leaders and their partners did. So you're going to hear 3 of those today. But we also thought about creating tangible stories and also thought about challenges. What are some of the ways that we can bring storytelling to life in a number of different ways? So our first session was the fundamentals of what I call a story-centric approach to impact and engagement, really starting to go deeper into, when we're talking story, what do we actually mean? From there, we went into how do we create stories with purpose and emotion? Not just any stories, but really purposeful stories that are trying to really attract the influence of target audience and stakeholders. Session 3 was moving from storytelling to story listening and story amplification, followed by one of my favorites, the future of storytelling for impact and engagement. Again, really thinking about different ways that we can bring stories to life. And then finally, again, is those capstones, which you'll hear a couple of them today. So I also wanted to give you a little bit more context before we hear from the leaders. And I wanted to share with you in the limited time that we have 6 story principles that I think are important for all of us, no matter how we're touching this particular work within economic development. What are things that we should be thinking about? And the first principle that I think is important is that everyone is a storyteller, even if you don't think you are. There was one study that said at least 65% of our everyday interactions are based on stories. We live in this world where we are consuming stories, sharing stories, even if we don't realize that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we always have to be the storyteller, as we can play other roles within that process of sharing stories. The second story principle that's really important that we covered within our sessions as well is that there are so many different types of stories. You ask 10 different people what a story is, and you'll get 10 different answers. I always kind of say that tongue in cheek, but it also is really, really true. As we look at academic research, there's not a centralized definition of what a story is. It's kind of this epic debate, this Danielle Steele dramatic novel of these researchers saying, this is a story, no, that's a story. So as you think about it, and I'd even encourage you to put into the chat just so we can see the different perspectives we have on the line today, is how would you define a story? And as we think about that, there's 2 kind of basic categorizations. First is informal stories. Those are stories in conversation. They're not perfectly created, they're ad hoc, they're in the moment, but they're really important. They carry meaning and they help to build trust. But then the other type of story is formal stories. These are ones that are created ahead of time when we're really trying to reach those key audiences and stakeholders, and we put more of an investment of time and effort to create them. But do you see the kind of the best of both worlds? And that's really what we were after with these sessions, is how do we bring these 2 a little bit closer together? And of course, with influence and outreach, we need both. We need those informal stories, we need the formal stories, but how do we bring them a little bit closer together? So the leaders that you're going to hear from in just a moment, they worked on thinking that through within their respective teams and organizations as well. The third story principle is that purposeful storytelling is key if we want to break through the clutter. Needless to say, there is so much that's out there, even unrelated to our areas of expertise and topics. So if we really want storytelling to break through that clutter of communication and outreach, we've got to think about it very purposefully. So we went through a planning process, and before actually thinking about what a story is, the different ways that it would come to life, we're thinking about these key steps that you see on the screen. Is we're thinking about what are current priority projects, programs, initiatives. What sort of action do we want to influence with them through a story? Who is that target audience? What emotions, what channel, and then evaluation. What does attainable success look like for that story? So these were some of the key lessons that we also went within. And then the fourth story principle is that effective stories, they include key ingredients. So I like to think of storytelling more like cooking versus baking, right? Cooking, you get to be a little bit more creative, but you still have to have those centralized ingredients. And you see them at the bottom of the screen. There's a lot of frameworks that are out there, but this is one of the frameworks that I've created with my research at Georgetown, is that a really effective story for impact, it includes a character, a human element, trajectory. Stories chronicle something that happens. They're authentic and genuine, right? Using everyday words that people understand. They also have action-oriented emotions, not that tug at the heartstrings, not necessarily the big box emotions, as some people say, but more nuanced. We're taking people on an emotional journey. But they also have a hook. You've got to capture people's attention again. And then we're really thinking ethically about the storyteller. So not necessarily that we're always the storyteller, but often we're hopefully giving the microphone over and respecting, right, the voice of others and their lived experiences. And then the fifth story principle is there is more to storytelling than storytelling. And this is what I call story work. So as you hear some of these presentations, you might hear components of other aspects of what I call story work. So things like story listening, story convening, story amplification. And when you collectively do this and more, you see it's genuine, but it's also strategic, and it's getting other people within the process. So as you hear some of these presentations, you'll see that some of the story work is not just externally facing, but inwardly facing, thinking about strategic plans, thinking again about those ethics, and thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice aspects of this. There is so much more to story work than meets the eye. And then lastly, the sixth story principle is that there are so many ways stories can and should come to life. So story work, when done well, it's not just the things that are on the website or social media. It's thinking about bringing them to life in other sorts of ways. And there's tons of examples of this, but I've got to share with you just one of my favorites, and it's called the Human Library. And so the Human Library is originally coming from Europe. And the focus of this is to unjudge somebody, or don't judge a book by its cover. And so you convene a number of people who are human books, who share their stories, and some people who are human readers who listen to those stories and sit down with people with identities and experiences that are very different than their own. And what you do when you try these different ways of bringing people together through stories is really interesting things, and hopefully more impact can result. So when I've done this in the past with some of my students, these were the covers of their books, really talking about serious issues, things about being an immigrant in the United States. What is that experience? What is that identity and story like? Also thinking about the disease of alcoholism. And these are some of the things when I've done these before, that it's enlightening, liberating. People who participated in it, this is what they said. I felt connected to a stranger I didn't even know. Through a sense of community and empathetic understanding, the human library helped me to wake up to an issue I didn't even realize I was asleep for. So of course, that's powerful stuff. These are six story principles that really, I think, went across all of our lessons, but we've got to bring this to life. So I want to get our colleagues into it, and I want to hear a little bit about their feedback about what this experience was like. And so maybe, Tom, can we start with you with sharing what some of your big picture takeaways as we went through all these lessons together as a cohort? What were your takeaways as to how storytelling has helped you in your region with your economic development work?
Yeah, first, I'll say thank you for allowing us to be part of this, and thank you, John, for an incredible opportunity. And if anybody has the opportunity to take this course in the future, definitely do it. But for me, it was really serendipitous, or a light bulb moment for me as a leader. Really quickly, I had a funder in a little bit before this program started that as a leader, and our company is very data driven, very results oriented. They were in to check up on some programs we're running, and we sat down. I slid across the data pile to them, and they immediately slid it back and said, "Tom, where are the stories? No, where are the stories that tell the stories of what this data is doing?" And from that, and from this program, what I really took away is, as a CEO in a very data driven, results oriented organization, which is important, we can't forget that, as you said, we we enter the world with our head and our hearts both, right? And the stories are that limbic part of our brain that connect emotionally. So what I take away from this is, I really thought about my role now is, really, I'm switching from CEO to chief story listener, and not storyteller, because I don't think that's my role. Maybe there are times when that's it, but it's really telling the stories often through the eyes of the people that we work with, or hearing the stories internally. And I'll just close with saying, I also recognize from this course that often in my role, I forget to celebrate, because I'm always pushing, moving forward, and how important it is to listen as a leader to the internal stories in your organization too. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, so well said. You know, we are storytelling creatures. We respect, we need the data. It's not data or stories, it's data and. And so I love that kind of mind shift that took place. Kelly, how about you? You're, of course, Tom's colleague as well. What were the transformations, takeaways in your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think similar to Tom, kind of like he said, this came at a really great time for our organization. And something I shared with our cohort was, so my career right now is numbers, but it started really client facing, and I was in the work, doing the work with people. And when I was doing that, I was very invested in their stories and what they were doing and how they were doing. And when I came to Goodwill and my role kind of shifted a little bit, I didn't notice how much my mindset had shifted to numbers. For example, like one of my coworkers would say, "Oh, so and so got a job." And instead of maybe celebrating, or I would, like, for a second, I would then say, "Oh, did you log that job? Did you put it in the system?" And so I think for me, it was a really great reminder of, yes, obviously the data is important, but kind of like Tom said, sharing the story with funders and with other like folks in the community, it's really, people don't care as much about numbers. They do, but they don't. They really care about people and sharing those stories. So that was a really great reminder for me.
And remember, you know, one of the first things we did a day of story observation. I challenged you, pick that 24 hours and really dial up your awareness of all the stories and all the different ways they come to life around you. You know, and that really wakes us up, right? Is that stories internally, externally, Tom, to your point, in the organizations, they are there all the time. If we remember that, if we understand it, then we can start to tackle this story work. Janine, how about for you? We did a lot of work, but we also had fun in your cohort as well.
We did have fun because, I tend to speak up quite a bit. But anyway, there were always ahas, John, working with you. And even just 5 minutes ago, as you were talking about authenticity, I was reminded of this idea that you cannot hide opportunity behind technical jargon. And, my lens is inclusion. And oftentimes when you are in an emerging space, like an advanced mobility ecosystem jargon and electrification jargon, that people don't always understand what those terms mean. So we really need to make sure that we are actually authentically using our voice in a way that folks can receive us and hear us, right? Because one of the things that we've talked about a lot during our session was the idea of trust being very critical to the people that we're speaking to, right? Because we want to include them, we want to get them involved. So we have to make sure we're using the right language. And frankly, I think storytelling provides the opportunity to do that. It forces us to move beyond the jargon to the emotion, to the why, to how folks can get involved. But my aha was really that you don't tell stories about organizations. And I would frankly challenge anyone to go look at their LinkedIn post right now to see what the story is, the latest story. And it's probably something about your organization and what your organization did. But the stories really need to focus on the people, whether it's the people doing the work or the people that we're doing the work for. So I think those were like two big ones, for me. And, being from Detroit, storytelling is going to be critical as a way of dispelling myths or challenging assumptions about Detroit and the people in Detroit and the assets in Detroit and what we bring to the table. So storytelling is critical for the work we're doing.
Yeah, such great takeaways. And of course, Janine, you'll remember, what we also talked about is this rise of chief storytellers in cities around the United States in particular. And the first one is from Detroit, Aaron Foley. And he was named in a bar, the best and worst decisions happen in a bar. I think that was a good one. But again, really trying to change that narrative. So we talked a lot too about how do you shift narratives, not just these individual stories, but shifting those narratives in community, in organizations. And you're absolutely right, is getting away from that paradigm of having these stories be right about organizations in a hollow sense as opposed to human beings. Louis, how about you? What stood out as we went through this experience together?
Well, I think I'll start by saying what stood out to me began even before the course. It began at our RTI convening in Washington. And during some of our conversations when the norms were put up, and I think I've said this story, and Sarah and Pearl put a norm, be additive, not repetitive. And to me, that struck a chord. And as we were going through our storytelling, I recognized that a lot of us in our coalitions, we can tell our story. But in a collab, you need to be able to tell the collective story. And what comes into that is, as Tom said, as Callie touched on, and for sure Janine, is that ability to be empathetic and to amplify each other's message. And we do those two things by being able to listen to each other. And I take that back, not just to my work with a great team that we have in West Texas, but also to my own team at Workforce on how we can not be so quick to want to be the one to raise our hand and answer, but to allow others to tell their part of the story and find where our piece of that story adds to that, and to celebrate each other. As Janine said, we a lot of times come from different collaborations, from different angles, attacking the same issue, the same problem. But we need to be able to listen to each other and help each other be additive in our application of our each collective story. And the one thing I'll add, just about the experience itself, being from far West Texas, to be able to talk to people from all across the country who are experiencing the same types of challenges, but still have that helping, serving heart, it just helps me solidify the work that I'm trying to do and we're trying to do in El Paso, to know that all of you are out there.
Yeah, so well said. And that's the beauty of a story, is that, we are the same and different, and we can accept both through a story and almost celebrate that, right? Is that we can be different in all the ways that we are, but we find through that lens of a story a commonality or something that's relatable. And so we definitely put, the lens of story through a critical lens within this experience. We didn't always shout from the rooftops, right? We thought about some of the negative aspects and how to be more ethical with the story work. But I think that's a fundamental key that we also have to remember, is that relatability aspect of it as well. So we're going to transition to each of these leaders is going to share a presentation about their final work and what they came up with and kind of where they're at now and their thought process. So we're going to start with Janine. And Janine, as you get set up, I'll just remind everybody on the line, please do feel free to jump in with your questions in the Q&A. or if you just have reactions or perspectives that you want to add to the chat, we definitely welcome those as well, so we can think about these topics together. But Janine, I'm going to turn it over to you next.
Fantastic. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks again for this opportunity. We only have 10 minutes, so I will just kind of briefly walk you through our capstone project, which really ends up being a training. One of the things with the Global Epicenter of Mobility, we really want to step back and go, okay, what are the big challenges that we have, right? And we are a coalition of 25 partners, 25 different organizations, each have their own metrics and deliverables. They're reporting directly to the EDA through this Build Back Better Regional Challenge grant. We really don't have a lot of authority over their activities. But one of the things we're trying to do is to show collective impact. And one of the ways we can do that is by really creating an ecosystem of stories about the work that we're doing. So one of the things that we wanted to do, and let me do a shout out to Rebecca White. She is our communication director. She wasn't able to be with us today, but she was a part of the training that we did with John. But a couple of things we wanted to do in this storytelling seminar that we developed as a result of the program with John was to really get folks to understand our storytelling ecosystem. Because again, people are coming from several different partners with several different lenses, from supply chain to workforce development to testing, improving, innovation. So lots of different stories, but we really wanted to kind of shape an ecosystem. And as John said, kind of quilt together, right? Create this quilt of these different stories to help folks understand. And one of the big things we also wanted to do was to really prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm saying that because we really wanted to make sure that we are including people who have been historically excluded from this space. And again, that goes back to let's not hide the opportunity behind technical jargon. So we wanted to help our partners, our 25 partners, pull out stories that could help show and showcase the work that we're doing in the community. So I'm just going to walk you through this really quickly because these were some of the training elements that we used. It was a 90-minute session. And so as people are thinking about how do I do this within my organization, we took a standing meeting that was already scheduled and we said, can we use that meeting for storytelling, for the storytelling session? So we were able to take 90 minutes of a 2-hour session. And we did it just this past June, but this is what we shared, John, with you all back in April, May. And we tried to pull in elements that we found really beneficial during the training that we did with you. And again, you mentioned this, but our icebreaker was to kind of set people in tables and have them talk about a story they heard. And it was fantastic because there were just great stories that were shared in that space. It was really just to kind of get people thinking about, yeah, I do hear stories all the time, right? But you don't really think about them, right? And the hook in a story and what made that story good and, what action did you take after hearing that story? So we wanted to make sure we were kind of getting people in the space of understanding what it was that we were trying to achieve. And then we walked folks through, or we wanted to walk folks through like key messages. Everyone always says, hey, tell me about this thing. And you don't have 30 minutes to try to explain it, right? You've got the time that you ride in the elevator up to the 8th floor, maybe, right? Or you're at an event. So understanding how we might be able to identify key messages about the ecosystem and so forth. And then we did an exercise about, what stories are missing. And I hate to kind of skip through this because I think this is really important. And I know you all can't see this, but this was a tool that John shared with us we called it a storytelling ecosystem. But it really was for people to think about, like, what stories are we currently hearing about the organization? What stories are we telling about what we're doing? What stories are being told about what we're doing? Are they positive? Are they negative? And then what stories are missing? Because if we can identify what stories are missing, we get to control the narrative, right? And that's really important. We get to control the narrative about the stories that we want to share. And then again, other elements of our training program, we also did a basic 101. It's critical, it's important. I heard someone say, do you really need a class on storytelling? Absolutely. Because there are truly like technical kind of components of telling a story. And the framework of how you tell that story is really important, because otherwise you'll find yourself, as we talked about, telling stories about the organization and not stories about the people and the impact and what you're trying to achieve. So we, as a part of our training process, wanted to take people through this kind of basic 101, and then do an exercise for people to begin to understand purposeful storytelling, right? And so we had this great tool that John provided that we were able to use to show people these are the different kinds of steps and ways that you can think about it. And anyway, our hope was that we would end up this whole exercise with like 20 potential stories from people, right? Because we've given them the space to really think about it. We've given them the tools that they need to create these stories. So that was our intention, and that's what we hoped for when we first planned this earlier this year. So the question is, how did we do? Right? Because, you can plan something, but then actually executing it is a different thing. Listen, it was fantastic. Everything that we talked about doing, that we wanted to do, we were able to achieve. We got 40 stories out of this thing, which was incredible. And not just the 40 stories, but we got 100 or more starter ideas from people just by going through this exercise and really getting people to take the time to think about what stories are missing, what's not being told. And I thought that was extremely powerful for this. And this is something we added that wasn't a part of our original plan. But again, you've got a big ecosystem of stories that you can tell. And so we wanted to help people kind of frame and think about how they tell their stories. So we said, let's look at our core values. What are the core values of what we're trying to achieve, right? And these are the things we're trying to do here as a coalition. We are trying to create positive transformational change. We truly believe through this work that everyone's voice is important, especially those folks who've been marginalized. We want to make sure that we're centering people who've been historically excluded in our work. And so we said, think about collaboration, think about where we've shown transparency or accountability, show where we've been at the adaptability piece, but use the core values to help shape your ideas around stories, right? If all else fails, always go back to your core values, right? Honestly, because that's foundational for you. And I think that's where people found inspiration. One of our participants, Michael Lewis, he actually wrapped up our training for us. He thought that this training was really important because going back to, I think, what Thomas said, there's stories behind that data. We get so wrapped up in trying to make sure that we are hitting our metrics and so forth. But behind every single metric is a story and is a person. And Michael shared a story with us at that moment. I mean, during the training, again, we had created this, space of trust and a space where people could share. And he shared a story. He does workforce development work. And he shared a story about a man who was housing insecure. One of the folks that they got to come to their program, he was housing insecure, as folks would say, couch surfing, essentially. He really didn't have a place. But this person really wanted to be able to, find his agency and to be able to step up and make a change in his own life. And he reached out to a program in the city of Detroit. And Michael was able to, get him some wraparound services, help to find him a stable place to stay, and got him into a training program associated with this advanced mobility ecosystem, right? Something that he never thought he would have an opportunity to do. But that story bubbled up from this training, and it was really exciting to hear. So I guess that's it. Storytelling is magic. It's do the work. This is the way that you can create collective impact. This is the way that people can actually see and understand and feel what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So that's it. Happy to open it up for questions.
It's fantastic. I mean, Janine, that's not just any old workshop, right? So your outcome immediately, at least, as you mentioned, 40 stories, so blew away expectations, and over 100 starter ideas. So I imagine that those are ideas for future stories then down the road?
Absolutely. In fact, literally, we've just turned all those story ideas over to our PR company. And we're like, okay, let's go through these stories. Let's see which stories make sense. What stories do we want to lift up first? And for me, it's really about what stories can we create that counter the narrative. That's so critically important in this world that we live in of rhetoric that is not healthy rhetoric. If we can counter that rhetoric by lifting up marginalized folks and showing the contributions that they do make in a regional ecosystem, I think it can be powerful for change.
And that's a crucial story type, right? I gave the informal, formal, and then you break them down. Counter stories are a key one, going in the face of entrenched narratives, right, in society or a community and presenting an alternative. And that sounds like you really uncovered with the idea of the story ecosystem. So I want to elevate that just quickly a little bit more, Janine, because that's an important concept and it can be a little bit amorphous. So I know I think you came up with this line, or your colleague: a storytelling ecosystem is a dense, dynamic network of story molecules. Plant the picture in your mind that helps individuals and organizations build meaning, belonging, and usefulness. And as we talked about it in our session, to me, it's an analogy, as we think about what an ecosystem, rainforest, tundra, all the animals, all the plant life, right? You have to have healthy ecosystems. You also have to analyze your story ecosystem in order for it to be healthy. Can you talk more about that? What were some of the stories you mentioned? You found out some stories that were missing, it sounds like.
Yeah, we did. I think for me, the biggest stories that I kind of really focused in on are those that are lifting up voices that aren't typically heard in these spaces. And those are marginalized folks, people who have not necessarily been included in spaces. And so, as you think about our ecosystem, and again, we've got 5 pillars, we've got 25 partners, a variety of stories came from that. And I think a couple that I, found most notable are those working in our supply chain area. And again, you often think about big supply chain companies, but these were the smaller companies that have been engaged for a while in the automotive industry and are looking to make a transition. So, story about how do you go about making that transition, right? What kind of things do you need in order to do that was a story that I'm thinking of that was especially memorable for me. And I'm looking forward to what other stories are going to be pulled out of that. Because again, some of these are starters, and then it's a matter, no story is going to be complete. So you're going to have to remember, we worked our stories multiple times, going back and forth, right? Several different prototypes and iterations of a particular thing. So again, as we have starters, I think we're going to go back and say, what do we want the story to say? Is this story going to be a story about a hero, right? Or is this going to be a story of allyship? Like, what is this story going to really be about? And I think those will be revealed as we continue to move forward. So keep an eye out for our social media at Global Epicenter of Mobility in Detroit, and you'll be able to see some of our stories.
And it's hard to, when you start to operationalize the story work, it's hard if you haven't analyzed your story ecosystem to be able to know, again, the missing ones, which ones you need to dial up. So that work, even if you're not doing, of course, formalized research and data, would be great. But it sounds like you were able to identify this, of course, just with the insights you had, as well as working with your smart colleagues within this training. And what's more is that ecosystems evolve because guess what? Communities and society evolves. So going back to that ecosystem and analyzing it, say a year from now, I think will also be important.
Absolutely. And the other thing too that's come up recently is, I was talking to someone yesterday and I said, that's a great story. And the person said, that's just my everyday stuff. I'm like, yeah, but it's a great story, right? So sometimes thinking about the things that are just everyday, that's just my job, that's just what I do, but not realizing actually how impactful a story might be if we talk about the work that you are doing, right? And the lives that you are changing, and then talking about those lives that are being changed. But people oftentimes don't think about it. So it really is a mindset that I think you have to get into, right? Everything, as you said, and everyone is a potential story teller and a story to tell.
And really, I think the wraparound with what you've just shared with us in addition to all these other wonderful things, is you built and are building a storytelling culture. You're getting your colleagues involved. And as you mentioned, the key part of how do you build a storytelling culture, of course, yeah, you need capacity. That's one. But the second is what you already mentioned, and that's mindset, is getting people into the mindset of why this story work actually matters with all the other things that they have to do. So, Janine, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And so now we're going to hear from Thomas and Kelly, and they're going to share a little bit more about the work that they're doing.
Hi, yes, thank you, John. I'm just gonna share my screen really quick. You actually kind of built right exactly into what Tom and my project was. So Tom kind of alluded to it a bit earlier when he was talking about what he got out of this cohort. And really, it was just a great time for us as an organization to learn more about storytelling and really how to share stories. So when we were kind of getting together to talk about our capstone, we really decided that we really loved learning about storytelling, and what we really wanted to do was to create a culture of storytelling in our place of work. So what we kind of came from, what we really looked at is some critical questions about storytelling as it related to goodwill. And we kind of came up with 3 different ideas. So the first one is silos. So goodwill really works on a social innovation model. We have our retail stores that are funding our workforce development. And in a organization like that, where things are so separate, it can become very siloed. Is there an understanding of what one side of the company does and what the other side of the company does? So really within the organization, what are the stories that we're sharing? And then going outside of our organization, really looking at what does the community know about Goodwill of Western New York. I'm not sure about you guys and the Goodwills where you are, but when I first heard of Goodwill when I was young, I was like thrift stores. And I know specifically in Western New York, they Goodwill historically had worked with sheltered workshops in our contracts area. So we were known for working with those who were differently abled. But does the community know what Goodwill does now? Does it know of all of the workforce programs that we currently have? And what we're finding out is not necessarily. We're still building our story up in the community. And then lastly is really building trust. What are the counter stories that are being told about workforce programs and helping organizations within these communities who are used to people who get grants? They come in, they do a program, the funding is cut, they don't have it anymore. So what are the counter stories that we have to tell? How are we going to build trust with these communities that we are here, our program is here, we're going to stay here? So those are kind of the 3 main areas that we focused on. And then when we were kind of talking, here are some solutions. We're going to go a little bit into implementation later. But what we really want to do is build comfort around storytelling as a commonplace within our organization. So really making it something that employees can do when they talk with each other, coworkers, whether it's managers sharing things with those who they supervise, or leadership, or just sharing within, kind of like I said earlier, within the organization. So retail with workforce and so forth. Which kind of goes into my second one of breaking down the silos, and then really changing Goodwill's perception within the community. So both in the sense of we are people who are here to help and we're going to stay here, but also how are we helping you? What are the programs we have? And really changing how people see Goodwill. So really just going a little bit into the implementation that Tom and I kind of were spitballing around when we first did this. So creating this culture is something that's going to take work, and what is that going to do? So really the first thing that we wanted to do is implement storytelling as a development competency. So when you're having your annual reviews and as the organization, really making storytelling a focus of what we're developing professionally. Like we said, we thought that this cohort, the ability to take this class was fantastic. So really being able to share that among our staff. And moving on into that, so really kind of as a developing competency, really having trainings available to our staff. And also something Tom mentioned is not only our staff, but also our board members, because our board members are really advocates for Goodwill out in the community. They're out there sharing the story of this great organization that they work with. So let's give them as well the tools that we've learned to really go out and share those stories. And then something that John mentioned earlier that comes with storytelling is really making sure that you're telling stories ethically. So something that we would like to do is create a storytelling ethics committee. So we're having people from around the organization, whether it's in retail or marketing or workforce, coming together and ensuring that stories that are going out are ones that are being told appropriately. They're not being told about somebody, but it's being told with somebody, to make sure that we're honoring their story, not just necessarily using it as material for marketing. We're really using it as, look at this amazing person. And then with telling that story, really kind of sharing the story out, but honoring those who kind of help Good Skills, our new program, become what it is in the community. We really got a lot of support back when the program first piloted in 2021, and really honoring the support that we got from the state and funders to push this out into the community, because without their help, we could not do that. And they are very important to the story of Good Skills. And then also building that into our outreach and our marketing materials. How are we sharing what Goodwill does? How are we sharing our workforce programs? Is it in a way that is intriguing to the community? Is it a way that makes it feel like it's something that they can do? Is Goodwill an organization where they'll feel comfortable going? So making sure that when our teams are out, boots on the ground, talking to people, the stories that they're sharing about the program is something that will resonate. And that goes forward into marketing materials, into briefs. I know that we do a lot of research briefs with a local university, and something that we did start implementing into our most recent one is sharing concerns and barriers, but in stories. So for example, transportation can be difficult for people who live in rural areas, even in urban areas. Yes, we know that, but sharing a story about exactly how it impacts somebody and their family moving forward, and that can resonate with people a lot more than just being like, transportation is hard. So really using that to help people understand better. And then just something that Tom and I had discussed is maybe doing a little day in the life of people around the organization, whether it be truck drivers or people working at our donation centers, really just getting an idea, again, building, breaking down those silos to build an understanding of what each part of our organization that is so integral does. And then just a little bit of an update, because this happened, presented, I think, a couple months ago. So just starting kind of to implement this. So kind of all working together. So Tom really wanted to build this, like we said, as a competency within our organization. So he actually just recently showed me that he has built it into our strategic plan going forward, really making it something that is part of the culture of Goodwill going forward, and that will outlive me and him as we talk a lot about storytelling, really stays with us. And then really making that a priority in the budget so that it's not a barrier to being able to get this out to folks, because if we aren't able to do that, how are we going to build it into a competency? And then he also mentioned that we have invited some of our members of our board to really participate in an ad hoc storytelling committee. So really helping to lift the visibility of not only the impact of the work that we're doing in the community, but again, the profile of Goodwill, and really just intentionally centering stories in our monthly meetings, making sure that we are really, again, spreading the stories of what we're doing. Because we as workforce folks see it every day, but really taking the time to be intentional and telling the stories and building them up. So that is all I have for you. But yeah, so that's kind of what we were talking about. I don't know, Tom, if you want to add anything else.
Yeah, I would just add quickly, thank you, Kelly, for sharing all that. I think what we took out of this, you described well. This was really a watershed moment for our organization. It was a fantastic program, as Kelly said, right time. But what we wanted to do, what we took out of it is we wanted to embed storytelling into our culture. We want storytelling to be one of the pillars that we build everything on. And our new strategic, well, our updated July version strategic plan, we've actually have storytelling in there as a key competency in the plan with questions that we will ask if we have a project. How does this align with our wanting to build a culture of storytelling?
It's really impressive, right? I think it's you have that huge North Star of embedding it, taking that bold move, right, to move story work beyond just communications and marketing, where typically it kind of is housed, and embedding it throughout. And, kind of what I'm struck by is you certainly have both sophisticated ideas in that implementation plan, but also kind of the so-called, low-hanging fruit sort of ideas as well. And can you speak to that a little bit, Tom? Like how are you going to get your people on board with this? It's easy to come up with ideas, right? It's another of them to actually embrace it.
No, I think you make a great point. And the great thing about this team here at Goodwill today is we are the culture of low hanging fruit, picking low hanging fruit. So I think we will very much do that. This team has done a fantastic job maximizing the retail operations to support workforce. They've grown new workforce programs that really represent the needs of our community post COVID-19, being very thoughtful about what the needs are today. But how do you do it? I think how you do it is I think about you need to create a movement. And you create a movement only when people belong. So I think it starts with saying where we're going, starting with my seat and raising that flag and carrying it high. And I think as leaders, we have to remember if, for instance, storytelling is going to be embedded in our culture, just when we are getting sick of hearing ourselves talk about it, are people beginning to listen? And I think then as people begin to listen, they begin to experience as we start to drop these pieces in. I believe people will begin to belong. And once you belong, you move. So that's how I think about it. You don't move until you belong. So to your point, we can't just ram this down people's throats from the top down, but we have to let people see where they fit in, allow them to belong. And then once they belong, I'm very, very hopeful with Kelly's help that we are creating a movement within our organization.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I mean, having them belong and then that amount of co-creation, of what some of this is. Of course, sometimes that takes longer, but hopefully that makes it sustainable. And, some of the other things I've seen with other organizations, and you have this embedded in yours too, is to show success, right? As to when this story work is actually, helping the mission and then the vision of Goodwill, showing that back, that all of this work that we're doing actually does matter. And then I think the other thing is also don't forget to have fun too.
Yeah.
It's if anything, I think with topics of story, if there isn't a little bit of fun and a little bit of whimsy, we're talking about a lot of strategic stuff here, but that fun aspect is, I think, important too.
And I think just in closing here, I'll say that was I mentioned earlier, for me, a huge takeaway again, very, very data driven, results driven. What you just said is really important. I've asked my direct reports, my senior team, to stop me and remind me we've got to stop and celebrate with the teams, right? We have to have fun. We have to stop and celebrate the wins along the way. So that was another kind of aha just for the CEO to sit up, pay attention. And it's like, again, it's not just numbers. It's about not just numbers. It's about grabbing the hearts and minds of the people that work here. That's part of my job, and I needed that reminder, quite frankly. So again, very timely.
So I'm putting you on the spot, but really quickly, tell us once you further implement this, when we come back to you in a year, what's the story? What's the story of Goodwill that we're going to hear with the implementation?
Yeah, I think the story that I have that I would love us to be telling is a story of opportunity. Opportunity for our organization, opportunity for everyone that works here, but most importantly, opportunity for Western New York and generations of our neighbors that have been left behind that are now having opportunity to step into jobs in advanced manufacturing technology that they have never had or never believed they could have an opportunity at. Again, why storytelling is so important for us. The individuals we're trying to provide opportunity to often don't see themselves there, like have never thought that I could have a job in advanced manufacturing or technology. So that's what I hope our story is when we come back a year from now, is a story of opportunity.
Yeah. And that speaks to narrative change and narrative shift. It does take time, but we can do it. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tom, Kelly. Appreciate it. We're next going to go to Louis, who's going to share more about the work that he's up to. And just as he gets set up, just a reminder, afterwards, we're going to have time for some Q&A and further discussion. So please do continue to put questions or thoughts that you have into the chat. But Louis, when you're ready, take it away.
So thank you, John. Everyone was so seamless in their tech. I just want to make sure that my screen is being shared.
Yes, you got it.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and thank you. My name is Louis Castillo. I work for Solutions Borderplex in El Paso, Texas, part of the West Texas Aerospace Defense Manufacturing Coalition. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's a really important coalition. I'm going to tell a quick story about myself. So I started at Workforce last January, about 18 months ago. And one of my first assignments was aerospace projects. And I kind of shook my head and scratched my head and said, aerospace in El Paso. And I've been a lifelong El Pasoan and really never considered El Paso, Texas as an epicenter for aerospace and innovation. And so really quickly, I met the team. I met Dr. Shaduri and Susie Bird. I met team from the city of El Paso, Jessica Silva. I met some great partners from the county of El Paso and from the Rio Grande Council of Government, and just countless nonprofits and other business partners that are part of this coalition making this goal, this vision, a reality in El Paso. I could advance my screen. All right, folks, there we go. So for those of you that don't know El Paso, real quick, El Paso is the western part of Texas. We're closer to Los Angeles than we are to Houston. Houston is closer to Orlando than it is to El Paso. So that gives you an idea of the breadth of the area that we're talking about. But one of the beautiful things about El Paso is the skies. And the skies make it a perfect place for aerospace development. Fort Bliss, the second largest military institution in the country, is our neighbor. And White Sands Missile Range, the largest military institution in the country, is our neighbor. To the south of us is Blue Origin. To the north of us is Spaceport America. Where else would you want to test and launch rockets? So when I was going through the cohort and I thought of all of the different stories we could tell, because there are many, I had to center on one that I wanted to share with the group today. So we started last year talking about back mapping this idea of aerospace into our K-12 system. Dr. Shaduri, I heard him referred to one time as the K-2 PhD system. So they were offering multiple on and off ramps for our kids who want to come into the field. UTEP does a phenomenal job of creating engineers, great, powerful engineers that do great work a lot of places outside of El Paso. Our goal is to create El Paso as an epicenter hub. And I want to share one example of a success that we did. All the pictures you guys see are participants of a work-based learning program that we put together with UTEP and with the EPISD. The idea, not mine, I was able to be a part of it, but the idea was to recruit students from our local CTEs who would want to do an internship at the Aerospace Machining Center on Francis site. And it was an interesting dilemma for us. And one thing I want to point out, the Francis site is in a 79905 zip code in El Paso. That's our second worst zip code in El Paso. What UTEP was able to do was repurpose a building that was no longer in use and turn it into a building where literally rocket science is happening, rocket machining is happening. And it's me, the reason why this story is so much a part of the larger story is because it's what we're trying to do as a coalition on a larger scale. We're trying to lift up an entire community with the empowerment and with the will and with the understanding that aerospace and defense manufacturing and other advanced manufacturing is real in El Paso and is a real field of interest for kids and parents who are worried about what their kids are going to do. Just really trying to embed that in that supply chain, that talent chain that's coming in to the project. So as I said, like a lot of you, we're building collaboratives, right? And so what happens with a collaborative is you're dealing with so many different people, so many different policies, so many different vantage points. And it was no different with this example. We were looking at three organizations, Workforce Solutions, UTEP, and the El Paso Independent School District, each with different rules, each with different requirements, each with different policies regarding this kind of project, which hadn't been done. But at the same time, we were working with the CTEs, we were working with the students, and we were working with the parents. My partner in the field, Claudia Guerrero, and I were able to meet with some CTE directors and talk and pitch, and they were all for it. And we thought we'd have a heavy recruitment. What kid doesn't want to be a rocket scientist, right? But at the end of the day, we had three that maybe wanted to do it. And if any of you have ever, talked to a group of teenagers, you could understand or you could empathize with that disinterested, disconnected look when we're talking to them about the program. And the parents with a lot of skepticism thinking, as I used to think, 18, 20 months ago, aerospace in El Paso. So it did take some work, and it did take some door knocking and a little bit of browbeating to kind of just do it, just get it started and get it rolling. And so we did in January. After that initial meeting, we had three kids from one of our local CTs, from two of our local high schools, start the program in January. In the picture, and I really want to stress the hard work that Rick Keller, who's the senior machinist at the Francis site, on top of the work that he does with the UTEP students, was willing to take out these three high schoolers and help them out. A picture of the young man at the beginning of my presentation, Kevin, a sophomore at UTEP, quickly became that lead mentor. And so through the course of that semester, they were able to learn about machining, learn CAM, and take some of the work that they had already learned at the CTO program and take it to that next level, working on machining, working on producing items that were going to be used for the UTEP Aerospace Center, for actual projects that were going to be used and shipped and sent to the moon. And what the kids did through those 5 months, to me, when I would go visit them, it was just inspirational. And to see the look on their face from when they first started and they were apprehensive, disinterested, not sure if they wanted to do it. I remember this young man in the picture when we were interviewing him for the project. His question was, well, it can't be boring because when I'm bored, I get on my phone and I really don't like to do that. When I talk to him a few months in, I go, "Where's your phone?" I don't even bring my phone. I leave it in the car. He's just nonstop. They're engaged, they learn, and this is exactly what we wanted to see. This is exactly what we expected to see. But when you set up a plan and all the tribulation that happens before and all the, start, stop, hurry, wait, when you see it come and you see it end with smiley faces, with some successes, it just makes us ready for that next quarter. It makes us ready for that next group. We aspire for greatness because we know we can do it. You know, we have a culture of making things. We have a culture of fixing things. We have a culture of creation, and we know that we can do that. We know we have a culture of success where we can create these pathways for manufacturing, for aerospace, and these kids are part of our success. What part of the storytelling and what we're looking to do next is being able to amplify these messages. We have a small clip of where this small story will later turn into a bigger story for us. We'll just spread the message in the community and outward. I'm hoping tech helps me and that we're able to all hear this quickly.
El Paso graduates face a low-wage job market with limited advancement. Workforce Solutions Borderplex, UTEP, and El Paso ISD created a machinist training program with hands-on experience in high-tech labs. Graduates of this mentorship-driven program qualify for well-paying jobs. Workforce Solutions Borderplex is extending this model to other skills, creating an educational pipeline for the aerospace sector. This boosts career advancement and local economic growth.
I'll stop sharing there and just say thank you for watching. I could have talked for an hour, and at times I probably could have slowed down. But the enthusiasm I have with this particular project, it's just something that I'm really happy to be a part of, and everybody who is part of it. Two things that I didn't expect as outcome to this was at the end of the 5-month program, all 3 of the boys asked if they could stay longer. We were able to find ways to extend their mentorship with Rick and Kevin. And really Kevin as that student supervisor, that student driver, which really wasn't even something that we were anticipating. I could do a whole story, and with the help of Frank Luna at UTEP, I probably will, on just Kevin, and he is that kind of student mentor, which is really the model that Dr. Shaduri and everyone at the UTEP Aerospace Center has used to have those students working on hands-on projects from their freshman level and now from their senior level in high school. So I appreciate the time and I appreciate the opportunity.
Louis, when I hear you, I always learn more about the innovation that you and the team are leading in El Paso. And from a story perspective, I mean, how many people can say, as you did, what we are doing here is going to be sent to the moon? So that's not only impressive and innovative as we think about it in story terms, you know, my goodness, is that a hook? So Louis, as you share with these, and there's so many facets, right, to the work that you and the team are doing, you know, you're mentioning lifting up the community, all of the collaboration. I'm really interested if you can share with us, what are other types of stories then that you want to be able to create and share as you continue to get support and impact for your work?
You know, this story, I think tugs at my heart, but one of the things that we know is that we have a strong machining industry in El Paso, and we have a strong small business. So you have literally hundreds of mom and pop shops machining this, you know, intricate, you know, work that's being used for really important things from the medical field to aerospace to defense, and really being able to prepare our students to pipeline to grow those industries and to grow the community. You know, we have so much talent here and so much opportunity, and it's like so many of the collaboration find, it's a lot of really good people doing a lot of the same work, just being able to do it together. You know, rowing that ship in the same direction. You know, it's very rewarding, and I see it in some of the other projects that we're doing and some of the other partners that we're building.
And also, and really quickly, you know, would you and the work that you're doing really exemplify to me is story listening. You know, as you're talking about the young people that you're working with, is you're also doing a lot of listening. What are the things that you're hearing from their stories that then influence the work that you're doing?
At first, it was, kind of question marks, is this really something that I want to do? And now it's, what do I need to do to take those next steps? Whether it be enroll at the Aerospace Center, whether it be, track into some specialized training, whether it be, because some of these kids can already be running these CAD and CAM machines right from the bat. So them understanding how we as a development board are there to support, but also how the city's there to support, how the county, and how we're a region. I started with El Paso, but we're really a West Texas region that is really vested in uplifting ourselves. We're along a border. We're at the nexus of nearshoring and reshoring. It's just time is great, and what we also want to do, because we know and we realize that a lot of times El Paso can be seen at a national level with a lot of skepticism, but we want to share those positive stories because it's a beautiful city with a lot of great things that have going for them.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for sharing, Louis. We're going to invite everybody back. And Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you, and hopefully there's some good questions and we can have a little bit more discussion.
Yes, thank you all so much. As I think Maybell says here in the chat, color me impressed. That was so inspiring. And so I loved hearing how each of you took this experience and these learning cohorts and really tailored them to where your community was, your region, or your organization, and how to adapt that to those like present needs. And I was just jotting down all these takeaways and just, the ecosystem of stories and metrics, storytelling culture. Janine, I loved how you talked about cutting through the jargon so that, we can get to those stories. And Louis, also, when you said early on about being additive with our stories. So much here. I want to go straight to the questions. Well, first of all, you have all inspired and lit a fire under a lot of our participants because everyone wants to join this cohort as well. I just want to answer a lot of those. I've tried to answer some of those questions in the Q&A, but this learning cohort was for the Build Back Better Regional Challenge grantees who participate in the Building Better Regions Community of Practice. These cohorts happened last winter and spring. And so unfortunately they have concluded, but we are posting the resources that we can in our resource library. So you can check the chat for that, or Pearl, if you'll drop that link in there so we can make these as accessible to you. And I think as someone else mentioned in the chat, how can I copy and paste this for my region? So we'll do what we can to share out so you can use these tools in your region as well. And just thank you, John, and thank you all for all of the inspiration that you provided. I'll go in order with some of these questions. I believe that you touched on some of this, but the first question came from Sujo, which was, how do you balance between data and storytelling to make a collective decision and direction for the economic development in the region? I know you all touched on this. I know our friends from Goodwill, New York mentioned that right out of the gate, Tom. So I don't know if you want to take a first step at that. And Janine, I think you mentioned also you had some points to add there.
Yeah, so the question is, how do you balance storytelling with data and metrics, right? So I'm going to say still learning how to do that, because as I described, my brain is wired towards the data side of things, but again, have recognized how critically important it is. And yeah, I think data is super important. We can't forget that, because the funders are going to look to the data to see what happened with their investment. However, as I described when I had visits from funders, the stories are what move people, what attach people to the project. So I think where this becomes really important for us in Western New York is carry-on funding, and how do we get to the next step? The stories of what we did are going to be just as important, of how individuals that live next door to somebody else were impacted in our community are going to lead to that next level. So didn't directly answer the question, but yes, it's super important that you balance the two, but I'm beginning to believe it's a little bit out of balance, and I want us to let the lever lean a little bit more towards storytelling. The data's got to be there. It's just part of what we do, but don't forget about the storytelling. Not me telling the stories, not through our eyes, but through the eyes of the people that are we're trying to work with and give opportunity.
Great. Janine, did you want to add anything there?
I would love to go. So, you know, I started off my introduction. My title is Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice Officer. We are fighting for our lives with this work. DEI, as some of you have heard, is under attack. And I came across, for me, I'm going to put it in the chat. This is a video, and if you get an opportunity to check it out, it is the Department of Defense, like a committee meeting on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I have never seen someone do it so well. They balance the data and the information, right? They're challenging a lot of assumptions, but they pepper in the storytelling, which is phenomenal. And the way in which they pepper in the storytelling creates that, makes someone who may be against DEI or inclusion and equity kind of really question themselves, you know, because the stories are so relatable and they're so human. And the way in which they did it, you could look back at your own family and go, oh yeah, oh, actually, that makes me think about my own family, my own story, my own history, right? So I think that there is a fine balance, and I really believe that they did a phenomenal job. A lot of data, but each data point in many ways was backed up by a story of actual impact. So I thought that was really powerful.
And another, quick way to think about it is really answering who are you trying to reach? Who is the audience here? Who is the stakeholder? And when you go through that thought process, that should help you understand a little bit more what might be that balance between story and data. And I kind of think of it as a continuum. On one end there is data, and on the other end it's what I call story, very human. And then there's somewhere in the middle. So you can kind of think about that on a spectrum. And then as these examples that have already been shared is, what is this particular setting that you're in? Are you going into, Janine, sounds like that example, are you going into the data, but then pulling back to the story, or vice versa? So there's a kind of a couple ways to think about it to actually operationalize how to do that.
Great. We have a couple of questions around the process and getting permission for telling stories, especially if they involve, of course, other people. So I'll just read both of these together. This is from April. How do you get permission, or is it necessary to use a person's story, for example, in a grant application? And a little bit of a similar question is, what is the process for sharing the final story with the person that you are highlighting for their review or approval? John, I've heard you talk about this before, so I was gonna point it to you, but if anybody wants to take this, just jump in.
I'll kick it off at a high level, at least, maybe, and then if somebody wants to jump in. I mean, it's so crucially important to think about the permission aspects of it. And, the very vast social sector is talking more and more about this topic. And there's not a right or a wrong way, I hate to say. There's not here's this workbook that you can do to answer all of those questions. But I think, some of it is you most definitely need to ask permission if you are asking for somebody's story. That might involve an interview process to help solicit their story, asking open-ended questions, asking questions about how they feel. And then the final product of the actual story, if it's written or video or whatever it might be, you need to share that with them for approval. There are so many stories that are out there that people have no idea that they're in or what the shelf life is in. I've been used in a promotional video for my university from 15 years ago. And I have no idea about that. So we need to get into a better habit, not just that product of a story, but what are the ethical components? So, you know, as Kelly and Tom mentioned, some of their work with the culture building is thinking about that, you know, ethical story committee. Other organizations are building story code of ethics. Major recommendation I would give is what are some of the non-negotiables? So you're actually getting those permissions as part of it.
Yeah,
What I add, I'm sorry. What I
No,
was
go
going to
ahead.
add, Sarah, is when I met with the kids in our program, you know, I talked to them and said, look, we'll be taking video. One of partners at UTEP Prank took some videos, some pictures, and we explained to them, look, you know, we might use these for those, and they were okay with it. You know, some said as long as I don't have to talk in front of a camera, you know, but really, I think what I learned from the class is being genuine to that participant. You don't want to take their story and make it for them. You need to know them and talk to them and understand their perspective, and not retell it in a way that just serves you and doesn't do dignity to them.
Great.
I agree. I was just going to say, you know, my daughter showed up on the cover of a magazine and no one asked her permission. So I thought that was really interesting. But, you know, it was a public event. And sometimes when you do that, you end up showing up in places. But the one thing I wanted to add, I was the CEO of a nonprofit organization for several years, and we would often lift up the stories of the people that we would work with. And then as we started to move on in years, you know, we said these stories have value to us because in many cases we're leveraging them to solicit funding. So I would encourage everyone to think about paying those people for their stories because those stories have value. So that's something else to consider.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think the way John described is very much how we do it is an interviewing process, asking permission. But I also think the concept of ethical storytelling is super important because many people will go through our program and they're are so excited and so happy that I always worry that there's sort of like in not that we want this to happen, but it just happens psychologically, a bit of a quid pro quo, like, oh, they asked me, how can I possibly say no? Because I just went through this program. So asking and asking again, and then even after the process is complete, making sure that the individual story, we're sat down with the individual again and talking through, showing them the story. Are you okay with this? And I also think too, letting a little period of time go from for us when an engagement ends to there's a bit of a settling period before maybe a story is told. Just some lessons learned on our end.
That's great. We have one question, and Kelly, I might come to you first, just so we can hear from you, if you're up for it. This question I think would be great to hear from everybody, actually. What are, and you've touched on this, but what are some of the most effective ways you've each used to share your storytelling?
Yeah, so I think this is something I'm still learning, but one of the ways that I do it in my job, working with data, is I'm really trying to look at the data, and Tom always asks me, what story is it telling? So I think for me, the way that I like to tell stories is to kind of, like Janine said, have a little bit of both. So I really look to my data, but then when I see something, I go to my team and I ask them, is there anything that you think can explain this? Like, get information so I can really tell the story of what is happening, not just assume that I know what is happening. So I think, I don't really know that that fully answered the question, but I think for me, it's really kind of making sure that I'm matching what's happening with actual, or what I see with what is actually happening, and then going and telling stories from there.
Great. Louis, do you mind going?
I think what I would add to Kelly, and we've said it a lot, is listening. You know, that this story, you know, I had a small part in this one story. The reason I can, you know, talk about the different aspects of it is because I've listened to the other part. So I would say to everybody out there who wants to be a great storyteller, work on your listening, and that'll really help a lot.
That is really powerful. Let's see, Janine?
I'm sorry. I was answering the chat. So
Yeah, no, sorry.
I saw-
What are some of the most effective ways you've used to share your storytelling?
Social media tends to be the big way to, to tell stories. I think one-on-one conversations with people are really important, especially, with funders. Have them in your back pocket. I think that's really an important thing to do. Those are probably the ways that I have primarily shared stories.
Tom?
I was actually going to say what Louis said, but I think listening, as I've described before, is really important in everyone's roles. That it this whole course wasn't just about storytelling; it was about other aspects such as story listening. And I think from a senior leadership role, I would say being as authentic as you possibly can let yourself be in your storytelling as a leader internally and externally is critically important, because I think a lot of times there's a bit of fear about how much can we let people see. But I've learned the more you become the better, the more and more you become authentic, the more and more you grow as a leader. So I would just say leaning into authenticity and not being afraid to lead into that.
Wow. John, I'm actually curious what you've what are some of the most effective ways that you've used to share your storytelling?
These are all great answers, so I'll try to add something in addition to it. I love utilizing physical objects. So, right, with stories, we're trying to make meaning, and physical objects can get across a message really quickly. So, especially for in-person storytelling, if you can utilize that physical object and explain what does it represent or stand for, that can be a really good way. Another quick tip is, unless if it's a really good story, don't start your story with saying, let me tell you a story, right? Because people are already then at the edge of their seat. And if it's not a good story, they're going to be mightily disappointed. So, like Janine said, I'm a big fan of in-person storytelling in meetings, whatever the case may be in a professional setting. But it's also a really good way in which to see people's nonverbal reactions and see if it's resonating. So you can utilize those stories that way as kind of a test, an experiment. What's resonating, what's not, how do I need to edit it, and then transition it into another form or format.
That's great. Well, we have about 2 minutes and we have one more question from Irene. How are you careful not to reinforce narratives of deficit, especially as they intersect with race and poverty? Any takers on that one? I see Janine, you're off mute.
I'm shaking my head because I'm looking at John because I know he's got the answer for this, because we talked about this, like we had a session about this during our training. So I'm stepping aside.
Well, that's huge. First, to be quite honest, asking that question is an important part of the process, and to ensure that that's considered. Then in terms of kind of bringing that to life, it starts with some of what we've already talked about, is who are you even choosing, to pick as an interview subject or the character, real person, but in story terms, that's called a character. Who are you choosing? Are you going back to the usual suspects, the person who is kind of most eloquent, all of the time, or fits a particular, kind of testimonial of the work that you're doing? We got to get rid of that. That's reinforcing. So who are some of the different sort of voices that we can get in there? You can also play around with who's the main character and who's the supporting character. So that changes the point of view as well, and gets more into hopefully asset-based storytelling. And then I think the interview process is really key in that as well. I've seen so many people, unfortunately, try to overly adhere to key messages, and they're kind of feeding people lines. Instead, we want those open-ended. We want those stories, right, to come out of how that person would naturally speak and categorize. So it comes from a couple of different angles that you've got to think about this one with.
That's wonderful. We're coming up on the half hour, and if you all will join me in giving a tremendous virtual thank you and celebration for this, whether you're clapping or if you want to use a reaction down there. This was really tremendous. So I want to thank you, John, for leading this, teaching us, helping us all learn more about the power of storytelling. I want to thank Janine, Kelly, Tom, Louie for sharing your stories, for sharing what you got out of this process so we can all learn about how to take these tools, take this process to our regions as we're doing economic development. I want to thank Pearl for all of her work to keep us coordinated and organized and help make this happen. And lastly, want to make sure we thank EDA for their support and their partnership in this work to bring these kinds of ideas and skills back out to regions as we're all working to transform our regions. So thank you so very much. That was by far the best part of my month so far. So I really appreciated it. And we will hope to hear these updated stories in the future. So thank you, everybody.